And welcome back here to Open. And peace journalism aims to change the way our media works and force itself to take more responsibility of how it reports events. The Peace Journalism Workshop is being taught at Bronx this week, and we have the professor of the workshop with us here on set, Mr. Stephen Youngblood. Stephen Youngblood is a two-time J. William Fulbright Scholar, and he's taught in 12 countries for the U.S. State Department, UNICEF, and USAID, and People to People International. It's a pleasure to have you here with us.
It's great to be here. Thank you.
We laugh at it a little bit because, you know, yesterday's a presidential debate. Things are heating up and things are getting kind of tight and right. But, you know, your mission and your message is really about promoting peace in journalism. In a day and an age where we see aggressive journalism, how do we achieve peace?
Wow. So do you have, you know, 4 or 5 hours to talk about it? Well, what I tell reporters is that the best that we can do is our part. So how do we achieve world peace? You kidded me before I came. And the answer is it takes a lot of different entities pulling together to make that possible. In the journalism world, I think the best that we can do as peace journalists is to create an atmosphere that's conducive to peace. So rather than focus on vengeance and retaliation and violence, instead as peace journalists, what we can do is be careful about the words that we use, be careful about the way that we frame our stories, and always consider the consequences of our reporting. And I think if we do these things, that we can do our part in ensuring peace.
When you talk about that, you talk about a lot of violence and retaliation. We have a tendency to focus on that. You know, in the business, if it bleeds, it leads. Right. It's often said that. And so that kind of journalism is an awkward approach considering mainstream media says, listen, if it bleeds, it leads. What's the message that you're sending to your students right now in terms of how do you approach a story? Because even in the, you know, out there, that's kind of like what they're looking for.
So there's no question that we're paddling upstream in many cases. And we're not going to tomorrow make the Post any less sensational or, you know, they do what they do, and that's fine. So the message that I'm giving the journalists is that when violent things happen, when crime, for example, happens, that we have to cover crime. So the question is, how do we cover it? What words do we use? If 4 people were killed, do we say 4 people were killed, or do we call it a bloody massacre? So when we call it a bloody massacre over and over again, when we emphasize crime, overemphasize crime, over and over again, what it does is it gives, sociologists will tell you, that it gives people a very mistaken impression about their society, about their community. I mean, look at the Bronx. This should be evident, if it's evident anywhere, it should be evident in the Bronx.
Absolutely.
I mean, as I've told my students, when I told my colleagues in Kansas City I'm coming to the Bronx, you can guess their reaction. You know, you're going to get shot. You're going to get killed. What are you going to the Bronx for? And so where did that impression come from? And the answer is that impression comes from the media. And I would argue, a peace journalist would argue, that the false impression given by over-reporting of crime and sensational reporting of crime has a deleterious effect on the community. So how much has progress in the Bronx, even though there has been progress, but how much has progress been impeded because of this misperception about crime? And how much of that misperception has been fueled by what I would consider irresponsible media. And
understanding that we can make and or break a story just by our words and how we frame it and how we shape it. Our young journalists, because you spend a lot of time with young journalists as you're talking with this Peace Journalism Workshop here at BronxNet, are young journalists a little bit more open to being receptive to how they shape and frame their words these days?
You know, actually, I've found receptivity everywhere that I've gone, with older journalists too. I think that once you lay out these principles of peace journalism, that practicing journalists too will start thinking about their own work and start thinking about their own work in ways that they hadn't before. So if I report this story in this way, what are the consequences? If I decide to report about a crazy pastor in Florida who burns the Quran, what are the consequences of that? So I think maybe an old school journalist would say, well, if the pastor burned the Quran and I report it, I wash my hands of it. I'm not responsible. Well, I mean, I think that's a cop-out. And I think that we do have to understand that the way that we tell stories matters in the real world. And so what a peace journalist would ask is, so why are we telling the story of this pastor? What one crazy individual in Florida, why is that news? And if the only answer we can come up with is it's sensational, it's interesting, balance that versus the consequences of telling that story. People died.
Right.
There were riots. So I think peace journalists are always looking for that balance.
And there is a level of accountability that we have to have as journalists and as, executive directors and producers and things of that nature. So the accountability factor has to rise. Do you see possibly a shaking in the trend, if you will, because we're seeing the sensationalism now? Is there going to come a point, do you think, that we're just going to say, you know what, enough of the blood and guts, let's go back to where we used to be? Do you see a change coming?
Well, there's always going to be a market for the Post. There's always going to be a market for sensational video, for celebrity garbage. I mean, that market's going to be there.
But it seems more mainstream now than ever before.
It does seem more mainstream. So I think maybe the best that we can do with peace journalism is to really begin some discussions in what I would consider more legitimate news operations. So for example, I went over with my students yesterday the Times coverage of the Empire State Building shootings a month ago, 2 months ago. And we showed some of the pictures that the Times used and talked about the appropriateness of those pictures. And it's those kinds of questions that peace journalists ask and are asking.
Now, if you're a peace journalist and you're out there, we've already admitted you're swimming upstream. What message do you give to those who might be trying to swim upstream, having peace, but are still bombarded by the likes of a crazy assignment editor who says, listen, I need to see that sensationalism? Talk to those people who are trying to make that difference, but yet and still encountering some resistance in paddling.
So the fact is that to implement any of these changes, a reporter's involved, but there are editors and the layers of editors, news directors, and so on, who also have to be involved in the process. So a lot of the seminars, so I've given seminars for both reporters and for executives, even media owners as well, because they have to be on board and they have to understand their responsibility.
You got to co-opt them into doing that, that's for sure, if it's going to make a difference. Got to start at the top and work its, well, I guess you can start at the bottom and work your way up.
Well, I think it works both ways.
Okay, we'll keep
meet in the middle.
That's it. So if you want to find out more about peace journalism, guess what? Right here at BronxNet, there's going to be a very special workshop. So share a little bit about this here.
So we started on Monday and we finish on Friday. Actually, it's a series of workshops. So I have 2 student groups, a Monday, Wednesday group and a Tuesday, Thursday group. And they're students and they're interns, and they're learning the basics of peace journalism. And then they're also doing a little field work. Actually, as we speak, they're out in the field shooting some soundbite montages. And so they'll come back and put those together. And so we'll sort of wrap the first seminar today. And then the Tuesday, Thursday seminar we'll wrap tomorrow. Then I'm also giving 2 shorter workshops on for access producers. So local producers, how do these principles apply to access programs and to those who are producing programming? So we'll have what I hope is a robust discussion about that actually at 5:30 today here at BronxNet.
All right. Well, Steve, thank you so much for coming and sharing with us.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure.
And definitely, it's something that we all have to apply, and it would make our journalistic life just a little bit better. So
I think so too.
All righty, Steve. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
All right. Now, for more information on how peace journalism sees news differently, and to get in touch with Professor Youngblood yourself, all you have to do is check out www.park.edu/Peace Center, and you can find out more information there.